The disease our country is suffering isn't just a series of colds, it's cancer. The patient isn't yet terminal, but it's a long, hard road ahead. Now, one of the keys to this cancer's success has been the slow seeping of secularism into our government, always in the name of tolerance, that in later years became militant and more recently is waging open warfare on the religion that underpins our entire civilization. Now, they claim they want a secular America, and some of them might actually believe that. But the end result of their success won't be some comfortable, safe, and enlightened future. The post-Christian world is a pagan world, and our next guest, the author of Pagan America, knows all about that. But before the religious, let's turn our attention to the constitutional crisis gripping our government. Not the one the New York Times talks about, the real one. John Daniel Davidson has written eloquently about this crisis over at the Federalist. He joins us now. John, thank you for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris.
So you've had two great articles out this past week at the Federalist. The first one walks through what reporters told us was an absolute constitutional crisis, that the Trump administration had not turned military planes over the Gulf of America around at the drop of a judge's verbal order. But before we get into the real issues at stake here, you laid out the case so wonderfully. I'd love to hear your take on why this was not actually ignoring the court, but was just acknowledging the limits on its authority.
Yeah, this was a case where this radical judge, Boasberg, thought that it would be enough for him to just tell Trump administration attorneys to turn the planes around, and then they would, I don't know what he thought they would do, like call the pilot, turn the planes around. The judge said, you got to go back. But apparently this judge thinks that he has the authority as a district federal judge, an inferior court judge, to command federal law enforcement and military personnel deployed over international waters and overseas and interfere with State Department diplomacy with a foreign government, in this case, El Salvador, which had agreed to take these alleged terrorist illegal aliens. And so the Trump administration's argument wasn't that they were defying the judge's orders. It was by the time they got the written orders, which there's established precedent saying that only written orders are valid orders from a judge, the issue and the orders were moot because the planes had already passed into international airspace and they were on their way to El Salvador as per the agreement between the State Department and the El Salvadorian government. So that was their argument. And the judge sort of flipped out at this and wanted to know, immediately demanded to know minute operational details of when the flight took off, who was on the manifest, what the route was of these flights, things that he has no authority to access, information he has no authority to access. And also information he's not competent to address as a judge. So this was obviously an abuse of judicial power. And I think the Trump administration actually showed remarkable restraint in going as far as they could to show deference to the judge and saying, look, we didn't defy your order. Your orders were just moot by the time we got them. And all the parts of your orders that we could observe, we did.
So, there was an interesting segment. You probably caught it on making the Twitter rounds, between Stephen Miller, representing the White House, and Casey Hunt, representing whatever network she's on. And it was kind of like, it was difficult to watch. It was like watching a teacher try to explain the law to someone who just knew it from schoolhouse books in elementary school.
Yeah.
She kept on saying, and I actually don't totally blame her for this, she kept on saying, but isn't our system of government that the judiciary tells the executive no and the executive listens? And you laid out, I'm really happy about this piece, earlier today at the Federalist, what our founders actually believed on that. So let me walk us through that.
Yeah.
Is Casey Hunt right?
No, in a word, she's not. And but she could be forgiven for thinking that our system does work that way, because we have all been propagandized over the last half century to think that our system of government is supposed to operate this way, where the judiciary is the only branch of government that can review the constitutionality of a law or an action taken by the executive. And that's specifically not what the founders set up. 3 co-equal branches of government means that the 3 branches of government are competent to adjudicate constitutional questions within their sphere of authority. That is how the founders understood it. That's how presidents all the way up to Abraham Lincoln and afterwards understood it. And it's only in our modern times that we've adopted this erroneous idea that whatever a federal judge says, even if it's just a district court judge, that can command the entire executive branch and usurp the president's Article 2 authority. That's not the system that we set up. You can't have that kind of a system. And indeed, the law that Trump invoked here, the Alien Enemies Act, which was drafted and passed by the same generation that wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the 18th century, the Supreme Court established in the 1940s that the actions that the president takes under the Alien Enemies Act are non-justiciable, which means they're not reviewable by the federal judiciary. They belong to Article 2 powers that are reserved to the president. And the Article 3 powers, that's the judiciary, isn't allowed to interfere with that, just as vice versa, the president can't interfere with Congress or the president can't interfere with the Supreme Court. So separate but equal branches of government is what we are supposed to have, but that's not what a lot of Americans understand our system to be.
Now, the El Salvador gang fight just seems like one of the latest and more egregious examples, but we've seen a couple. We got a lot, actually. We've seen more in these first 41 days than we saw in the entirety of the Biden administration, I think.
That's right.
So you have judges saying that heads of departments are not allowed to have access to the information in their departments. You have judges saying that the military and the commander-in-chief are not allowed to judge the mental fitness of those who enlist, at least as far as transgenderism goes. You have judges saying that you can't actually hold up money to left-wing nonprofits that was gifted them from the taxpayer by the last administration. And the Trump administration has been interesting on this. He's been very bellicose on Twitter, calling for impeachment. So you had Stephen Miller going out there and being a bit of a pit bull on this issue. But the way that their DOJ has actually argued has been quieter, more nuanced, more deferential, it seems, to the judge. And the president has also promised that he is not going to ignore these rulings. Maybe he'll decide which ones actually matter for him. But what is the path forward for this administration? There's only so many things you can fix at once. They're fighting the deep state. They're fighting this. They're fighting that. They're fighting everyone. How do they actually win on this without getting bogged down? Well,
this is the one fight that really matters, because if the Trump administration doesn't win this one, if they don't win this fight with the judiciary and the deep state, which, by the way, that's the same fight. The judiciary is out there right now issuing injunctions and restraining orders on behalf of the administrative state, because Trump is actually trying to take back control of the administrative state from the federal bureaucracy, which operates as its own fourth branch of government. It was actually designed to operate as its own fourth branch of government outside of the political realm. And when we say outside the political realm, all we really mean is not accountable to the voters. In other words, what we vote for doesn't affect what the federal policy is in any of these administrative bureaucracies that are putatively under the executive branch. So Trump has got to be successful in this fight against the judiciary and the administrative state. And I think there's only so much that he can do to be deferential to these judges before he has to say, in defense of his own Article 2 powers as president, he has to say, you know what, this is an invalid order by the judge, and the executive branch under the Constitution is competent to judge the constitutionality of our actions in this case, and we're not going to comply with this judge. I don't know how much more he can do before he's forced into that position. And I think they're trying to force him into that position. But look, this is a constitutional fight that we need to have, because for too long we have deferred to the judiciary as the sole arbiter of what is and isn't constitutional. And we've got to get out of that, because all that means is rule by judges and rule by bureaucrats.
And it's funny because Republicans think that they have relied on that jurisprudence in the past to defend them against the worst excesses. But whether it was transgenderism or gay marriage or whether it was Obamacare, it never actually comes through for the American right. It seems to always push the ideas of the American left.
Yeah.
But there's someone else, there's also a lot of ideas that you've written wonderfully about that are permeating American society and the larger West, and that is secularism. And you've seen this, right now it's actually in full battle in Kansas, where Satanists are trying to hold a black mass on the states of the Capitol, saying that they have a freedom of speech to be there, and they certainly have a freedom to assemble on certain grounds. But they've also claimed that they have a stolen Eucharist from a Catholic church that they will be using in this black mass, stolen property. You wrote really eloquently, wonderfully about this in your book, Pagan America. And what I thought was so interesting about the premise there was that these people who kind of just envision a secular cartoon version of Sweden as what's going to happen after the end of Christianity. But of course, that's not what happens. What follows, and who are some of the people who are pushing this?
Yeah, the future of a post-Christian America is not going to be this liberal utopia where we all kind of live and let live, and we have like a libertarian kumbaya, that's not how it's going to be. And we can already see that's not how it is. In the absence of the Christian religion being sort of the basis of our society, the basis of our civic culture and our government and our public morality, something else is going to replace that, some other religion. And what I argue is that it'll be a resurgence of paganism, call it neo-paganism, but it won't be secular materialism. Those two things, secularism and materialism, were aberrations of the Christian West, of Christendom. And as Christendom fades, so will they. And we're going to see the rise of groups like this one you mentioned in Kansas, the Satanic Grotto. All these satanic groups are now cropping up all over the place. Another one is the Satanic Temple. These are relatively new groups, and they explicitly posit themselves as religious groups and do horrible things like stealing the Eucharist to perform a black mass to attack the Catholic Church and to attack Catholic Americans specifically. And I think a proper understanding of what America is and where we come from would have to recognize that freedom of religion, like freedom of speech, has its limits. And the founders who instituted freedom of religion never imagined that it would be used as a pretext to attack what they would have called true religion or legitimate religion. We've lost the language to talk about that. And we've lost the substance of what it is. And so I think we're going to see more things like this crop up, more new religions and more non-Christian religions growing, as indeed a recent Pew study shows, as Christianity declines in America.
Now, you see some of this. We do have a state-sponsored religion, and it seems to be atheism, whether it's going after Christian symbols in the public. I mean, where I'm recording right now is not too far from the Bladensburg Cross, which was erected by World War I veterans returning from Europe, in the memory of their fallen comrades, in the method that they knew how to remember their fallen comrades, which is a beautiful cross. And the ACLU said that trampled on their rights as Americans, the ACLU's rights, and the people who have to drive by this cross, and therefore it must come down. It's intolerance. But what are some of the ways that you see this secular paganism expressing itself in our society?
Yeah. Well, what you just said, intolerance, right? So all of the things that we associate with the American way of life, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, tolerance for people who disagree with us, consent of the governed, the rule of law, the fact that we get to, choose our leaders. All of those things rely on a Christian framework, on a Christian understanding of man and society and our duties to one another, on the inherent rights of human beings, right? All of that comes from Christianity. If you get rid of Christianity, all those things are going to go too. So tolerance, freedom of speech, rule of law, the idea that individual rights exist and that they count for something, the equality of people before the law. The only reason we believe in the equality of people before the law is because Christianity teaches the equality of all people before God. The founders said that explicitly. Most Americans for most of our history believed that explicitly and said so. And so as we lose our Christianity, we're going to lose these other things that are very dear to most Americans. And it's not going to be the kind of country that you want to live in, whether or not you're a Christian.
Now, I know you're a little pressed for time. Your family's out there in beautiful Alaska. I can't wait to someday visit and see everyone. So I just got one more question for you. What are the people who are pushing this? What do they want? I mean, how many of them are useful idiots versus how many of them really want to destroy Christianity in the West?
I think a lot of them are useful idiots, as is often the case. But the ones who are driving it, the radicals, the ideologues, the people who are out here on the front lines trying to stage a black mass here in Kansas, as you mentioned earlier, they are attacking Christianity. And they're not attacking Christianity because they're radical atheists and secularists, right? They are people who increasingly do believe in the spiritual world. They do believe in an enchanted cosmos. They do believe in spirits and powerful beings that are here with us and that we have access to. They just hate Christianity, and that's why they attack it relentlessly. Without end, and they will keep attacking it. This is a war that we, sort of lulled ourselves into thinking that we didn't have to fight, that this was over. This was something in the past. Christian communities and Christian peoples in the past had to fight the enemies of Christ and his church. But no, we're going to have to fight that here in America in the 21st century, and we're going to have our own versions of religious wars. And unfortunately, that is just something that we have to start wrapping our heads around and thinking clearly about.
And I think it's going to look a lot less like the Civil War and a lot more like the 30 Years' War.
Yep.
The way that most civil wars look: assassinations, murder, abductions, torture. The swatting could already be the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Well, John Daniel Davidson, senior editor at the Federalist, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.